I would ask everyone listening to follow their heart as much as their head. The world has turned out the way it is at the moment because we've focused on problem solving using our heads. And I genuinely believe that an integrated approach using head, heart, and gut has far better likelihood of success and allowing humanity to thrive.
Today we're going to talk all about your strengths, the things that you're really good at. My guest, Christopher Miller, has just written a book called Finding Fish in a Strength-Based Practice. Fish might sound like a funny thing to be finding with your strengths, but it's an acronym. It stands for Fulfillment, Inspiration, Success, and Happiness. And this all sounds very upbeat and rah-rah, and it kind of is. But before you go into it, I want you to know that Christopher Miller is not a sort of naive, wide-eyed, see-no-evil kind of optimist. In June of 2020, his wife was diagnosed with a form of glioblastoma, and she died a little over a year later. And had to work through that. Had to find meaning, climb out of the depression and the suffering and the grief and the loss, and did so in a way that brought him fulfillment, inspiration, success, and yes, happiness. So we're not going into this naively. We're not going to this ignoring the pain and the problems of the world. And this idea of strength-based is really about us knowing ourselves and appreciating what we bring. So I hope you really enjoy the conversation. Without further ado, Christopher Miller, welcome to the Plant Yourself podcast.
Thanks, Howie. Good to be here.
I'm excited for our call. I have the notes that I took from our prep meeting, and they're pretty provocative. I have like just six lines, and they're huge. So I think we'll get into them soon. But first, could you just introduce yourself and let folks know a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Sure. So I'm a Canadian living in Wellington, New Zealand, and I've been running my own coaching and mentoring practice for the last 7 years. I'm a fairly experienced business development coach and have really quite recently leaned into strength-based, heart-centered leadership, which is really merging my passion for a strength-based approach to work and life, but also identifying how to leverage your heart in decision making as opposed to just your head, and that's proving pretty fruitful with the clients that I serve.
So I heard two things there that I want to pick up on before we get into the juicier, deeper parts of the story. So strength-based, I hear that a lot, and it seems like a very nice, obvious thing. But strength-based has been kind of revolutionary. It's a different way of looking at development. Can you describe what that is and what came before it and why it's important to you?
Sure. As a concept, it's been around for a long time. Like positive psychology was born like 40, 50 years ago or longer. And it's grown and grown and in the last decade has gotten very practical, very pragmatic, and it is philosophically about supporting someone's talent and identifying what they are best at in life and not worrying so much about their weaknesses or using their strengths to shore up a weakness. And so the potential of it in education systems, in workplaces, in personal lives is enormous. But it requires a mindset shift to actually appreciate how brilliant someone is at something. So the whole conversation around neurodiversity, for example, neurodiverse brains are exceptional at certain things, and they have blockages or barriers amongst other things. And a strength-based approach enables or facilitates those individuals to thrive. But that can be true of leaders, that can be true of followers, that can be true of students and teachers, anyone can lean into a strength-based approach. And it's important to choose a language or a tool that you're comfortable with and that adds value, and some discipline to the way you interpret strengths.
Yeah. So as you said, strength-based and positive psychology have been around for about half a century. But in my experience working in organizations and working with people, it's not the default human approach to evaluation, right? It's like that person, they're alienating people at meetings. We got to work on that. Or this person can't file their reports on time. It's the greasy, the squeaky wheel, or the pebble in my shoe that ends up getting almost all of my brain space.
Yeah, and the one of the things that I work very hard with my clients, especially my clients who have teams, and I coach primarily small business owners who have teams of from one executive assistant to a team of 30, and that mindset of why are you worrying so much about what they're not good at? When are you noticing what they are good at? How do you design their job to fit with their talent and get them doing, like, if they're an introvert and you're asking them to go out and sell, that's a crazy decision. That's just a crazy decision. And so how do you shape a role and a recruitment process and an induction and a training program that actually leverages the natural talents of someone, so when they're experiencing it, it doesn't even feel like work for them, right? They're loving what they do, they're doing what they do best, and they don't even notice that they're coming to work.
So how do you know what your strengths are? I for one feel like I'm good at a whole bunch of things that objectively I'm not good at. And there's other things that I am good at that feel like a struggle. Like I feel like I'm basically delusional about myself, and I expect that most people are.
And that is true, and most of the tools that you can use. So in the book that I've most recently published, I wrote a chapter on introduction to strengths, and I evaluated 7 different tools around the world on that are useful strengths assessments, and they are all self-assessment tools, and it is all based on self-awareness. But the ones that have been designed the best get through your delusion, and they ask you questions in a way that you have to choose a preference for what you love most or what you do best versus what you love least and what you do worst.
Uh-huh.
And the report, 98% of the time, the report spits out, this is who you are. And most of my clients, or all of my clients over the last 17 years of using a strengths-based tool, have, there are very few who don't look at their report and go, yeah, that's me all over.
Mm.
And when they share their report with a loved one or a boss or a colleague who knows them well, they will look at the report and go, yeah, that's you, that is you to a T. And then you have a piece of paper, you have a document or a report, some of them are quite long. You have a 26-page report that you can look at and go, well, now that I have the language to describe my talent, I can actually lean into that in my day-to-day role, or in my marriage, or in my parenting, or, like, there's a whole bunch of ways you can apply your strengths.
Gotcha. So you got to tell us the name of the book now, because that's if you've created an itchy open loop.
So my second book is called Finding Fish in a Strength-Based Practice: Fulfillment, Inspiration, Success, and Happiness in a Life Well Lived.
Okay, so we're going to talk more about fish, but let's get that out. Finding fish in a strength-based practice.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Um, so I mean, I have a love-hate relationship with any kind of assessment
Hmm.
of me, and and it's a problem in my work because it's such an easy marketing tool to be able to say, like, here's the way I look at the world, and here's how you can find out more about yourself, and then we can work on it. But I find there's something about putting people in boxes that I find very distasteful. So anything like DISC or Myers-Briggs, where now you've got a label and you can put it on a mug and hold it up, and other people know how to treat you. And it feels in some ways artificial and extremely limiting, even as it can be both helpful and a relief. How do you navigate that with helping people find their strengths?
I think it's a really good point, and I was a trained Myers-Briggs facilitator and a DISC facilitator, so I know those tools very well. My strengths tool of preference is Clifton Strengths from Gallup, but I have used some of the other strengths tools in the market, and the strengths tools relative to some of the older personality profiling, they tend not to give you a label. They tend not to put you in a box. They tend to give you a language, quite a rich and varied language to describe your behavior or to describe your talent. And so, for example, everyone who takes Clifton Strengths gets 34 themes in a unique order for them. And yes, you can put a label on your top 5 or your top 10, but the richness and the variation, like there's a 1 in 33 million chance of having the identical top 5 with someone else on the planet. And so the variability of reports is huge. And
Really?
therefore, my maximizer, learner, connectedness, input, and woo, I can use day to day to describe myself. And it's totally different to my practice manager who has a completely different top 5. And so she and I use that language all the time to leverage our talent day to day. And it I have rarely, when it's used badly, someone can throw a label at you. Anyone can do that. They can label you based on your number 1 theme, for example.
Oh,
But if
wow.
I think my number 7 theme is more important than my number 1 theme, you're off base with your label. So some of it depends on the quality of communication, the quality of conversation between the person who holds a report and the person in their team, a colleague or a boss, who is interpreting the report on their behalf.
So it's something to hold lightly, as opposed to kind of deterministically, right? Because the issue is that it can, if someone's got a fixed mindset, it nails them to a wall, like a butterfly in an exhibition. They're no longer alive and growing.
Yeah, yes. And I started using Clifton Strengths in 2010, and there was a while when I was debriefing people on a top 5 report occasionally and a full 34 report often, and it got to the point where I just stopped. I refused to debrief people on a top 5
Mhm.
because your number 6 could be really significant in your pattern of behavior, and you not knowing what your number 6 is actually detrimental to your development.
Uh,
So I now only coach people on a full 34 report because it's less likely that someone would use it on themselves in a labeling way, or if they
hmm.
used it in an organization, the chances of using a top 5 report in a labeling way is way higher than a full 34 report.
Gotcha. So curious what and I don't know. I ask personal questions, and you should feel free to,
That's fine.
to duck them. But when your Strengths Finder results have helped you to accomplish in your life that you might have been like muddled about without.
Yeah, probably the best example I can give to answer that question is I've only taken Clifton Strengths twice. I took it in 2010 and then I took it again in 2017. And I usually recommend people not to take it that frequently and only to take it over a long space of time and if your life has changed significantly. So I took it a second time in 2017 because I moved from the corporate world where I was a management consultant and an executive coach into owning my own practice and self-employment. And I felt my mindset had shifted, and I had been a parent for a long period of time, and I had evolved as a human being, and so it felt right to redo my assessment. Now, what was interesting when I did that was that 9 out of my top 13 themes remain the same. So stability-wise, the tool is very, very good. However, the 4 new themes that were in my top 13, some of them were up as high as number 1 in my sequence, were totally relevant to my energy as a self-employed person. And so I
Hmm.
went, okay, now that I'm not in a corporate setting, my activity and my behavior and my dominant mindset came out in my new report. And so the way that has helped me is I've been able to lean in to many of my themes to be successful as an entrepreneur and to be successful as a coach facilitator, which is the way I deliver most of my services. And so my awareness of my strengths, and I am comfortable that my top 15 are really relevant and really strong. And so I can pick and choose from those top 15. When do I need to be strategic? When do I need to create an intimate relationship? When do I need to stand in front of a big audience, which is woo, winning others over? When do I need to study more about coaching or more about human psychology to get to be a better coach? That's my learner and my input. So
Hmm.
now that I know what my top 15 are, I can pick and choose. If I'm in a relationship situation, I know which themes to pick. If I'm in a learning situation, I know which themes to pick. If I'm on a podcast, I know which themes to pick. That makes it. I have become more consciously competent at knowing what I am best at.
Hmm. What comes up for me there is there's kind of a an assumption in most of sort of Western business development and personal development of individualism, that I am a kind of a self-contained element. And what you're saying, I think, is that we are strong in an environment or in a relationship, that we're interconnected, so that you are actually a different person as an entrepreneur than you were as someone in the corporate world, that you're different in the family, and that there's infinite um, sort of dynamics involved in, and that we're not as separate as we may think we are or feel we are.
And that's totally accurate. And what's lovely about Clifton Strengths and many of the other strengths tools is they've been designed for life, not just work. So it's not a
Hmm.
workplace tool, it's a life tool that happens to be relevant in work. And so in my newest book, I wrote a chapter on strength-based relationships, and I paint a picture of how my practice manager and I work well together, because I am exceptional at what she is terrible at, and she is exceptional at what I am terrible at. And as a result of our partnership, we have an amazing commercial enterprise. And
Hmm.
when I coach teams and I put a team together and I sit in a room with 4 people and we use a team grid to summarize everybody's strengths, I can usually in a heartbeat identify where the relationships are working, where the relationships aren't working, why the team is fit for purpose or why they are not fit for purpose. It all comes out in the strengths patterns.
Meaning, so there's some strengths are better or more rewarded than others in our society, right? Does that create a bit of a hierarchy? Like, I'm just thinking, like, if you have strengths and your assistant has strengths, I'm imagining you make more money than your assistant, that. But and that in life, right, there are, like a professional singer or a top athlete versus the person who's really good at keeping the locker room clean. How do you help people appreciate and value strengths that are poorly paid?
So that's an interesting paradigm, and I think the world is changing very quickly away from that perception. Gallup have done a lot of studies of CEOs, C-suite executives, directors of sales, people in leadership roles, and they've tried to identify patterns. Are there patterns of strengths that dominate those senior leadership roles around the world? And the answer is they have not been able to prove that at all.
Hmm.
You can be an exceptional leader with almost any Clifton's with any strength profile. You can be an exceptional sports coach with almost any strength profile. The thing that differentiates a high performer from a low performer in any role is awareness of their strengths. Are they aware of what they are really good at, and can they execute that consistently? That's the difference. And my practice manager is an exceptional human being who has every potential to earn more than me. And in our relationship and the way we are developing as a practice, I can see a time when she will be a thought leader in her own right, earning what I'm earning or more. And everybody in life has a, for me, everybody in life has a core purpose, but clarity of purpose and clarity of strengths and your willingness to lean into what that means for you determines financially what you're likely to get paid for.
Mm, mm. That's I really like your approach of like everybody's needed, all hands on deck, as opposed to the way I've often seen strength used, which is to sort of justify existing hierarchies.
Yeah, and the 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 philosophy that's built into strengths is very egalitarian. It's inherently egalitarian, and it creates an atmosphere where every human being is valued for their inherent talent, and every human being has potential to be exceptional at something. And the role of society, especially education systems, is to help that individual experience enough variety of opportunity to actually identify what they're best at on this planet.
Hmm. This is kind of exciting. It feels, I thought we were going to talk about strengths as sort of like a jumping off point to more interesting things, but this is like pretty profound.
No, and it's what led me to write my second book. My second book was my love of strengths because I've lived it for 14, 15 years, and my love of entrepreneurship, which is who I am. And my practice only has me and my practice manager. And I coach and mentor other organizations of similar size. Now, I can coach bigger companies, but my preference is a fast speedboat, not a tanker,
Hmm.
because fast speedboats can turn on a dime. And if I can change an owner and an executive assistant relationship, or if I can change an owner and a team of five in a 3 month program or a 6 month program, I can change that company in a heartbeat. Whereas if I go into a big organization, a government department, or a big university, or a big uh, corporation, I have to touch a lot of people to move the tanker, and
Hmm. Yeah.
it's much harder.
Yeah, and it sounds like, when you say that the key issue is awareness of strengths. Awareness is a very delicate flower in a world that is constantly distracting and trying to impose its priorities on you. I imagine, I'm thinking about large organizations that had big culture shifts and how much of the collected energy had to go into creating and maintaining and stabilizing that shift. It seems very daunting.
Yeah, and it can be done. There, having worked with large organizations for some time, particularly when I was employed at Gallup for 7 years. Um, Typically, a change program happens in one of two ways. Either there's a high performing team that is attracted to strengths philosophy, that onboards strengths philosophy, are noticed for performing at an even higher level, and it takes a viral effect within the company, right? So it could be a leader of leaders, it could be a frontline manager, but somehow the obviousness of strengths impact infiltrates like a virus. The other way it happens is a board or an executive team actually see the value of a strengths philosophy, and they fundamentally change recruitment, they fundamentally change performance management, they fundamentally change performance reviews, and they lead by example. So there are dairy companies and banks and government departments at the senior level, and strengths penetration in New Zealand is very high relative to other places around the world. Um, there are organizations where the board has onboarded strengths philosophy, and they talk strengths language when they do their strategic planning,
Mm.
and the executive team talks strengths language when they are talking about recruiting a new member of the executive team. right? So when they live it and they walk the talk and they lead by example, it infiltrates the rest of the organization that way. But
Gotcha.
what's more powerful is when high performance goes exponential because of the language of strength.
Hmm. Yeah. So I want to ask you one question about weaknesses, which is what we're, trying not to focus on. But there are in the work I've done, people will have a weakness that will prevent them from even accessing their strengths. So and I think I'd like to talk to you about sort of the emotional parts of your life and your journey. But for someone who's experienced a trauma or someone who's neurodivergent to the point that it's very hard for them to stay focused. So if you say awareness of strength is the key differentiator between high and low performance, there are people for whom sustained awareness is a real challenge. How do you think about and deal with the weaknesses that could undermine the strengths-based approach?
That's a great question. The typically what I find when you're dealing in an organizational setting is strengths language allows insight within a team environment that you don't otherwise get. So, for example, when two people are in conflict, I can identify almost without meeting them, I can identify from their strengths profiles why they don't get along. And as soon as the individuals are made aware that your competition is butting up against her harmony, and if you appreciate the value of competition and the value of harmony in each other, the relationship changes fundamentally.
Oui.
And so weaknesses show up in strengths in a couple of different ways. Either there's an over exaggeration of a strength that pisses people off, or there's an absence of a strength that's way down your list. Like I have items in my bottom 5, so 30 to 34 in my Clifton strengths that were in my wife's top 5. That made us a very powerful partnership.
Hmm.
And rather than expecting her to be more like me, I was able, because of strengths language, to look at her profile and go, you are exceptional at stuff that I don't even have a clue about. I don't even know where to start on some
Yeah,
of
you have
your
an
talents.
example?
Yeah, so she had consistency. She had consistency in her top 5, and consistency is two things. It's the behavioral reliability, like being regular with your behavior, but it's also equity and fairness. Consistency is all about justice. And my wife was a family lawyer, and she stood for justice her whole life. And she was very good at not picking favorites at work and in our family. She was very good at not picking favorites. I, on the other hand, have individualization at number 8 in my pattern. And individualization is an appreciation for the uniqueness in others and treating everybody differently because of that uniqueness, right? So they
Hmm.
are a little bit opposites. She had consistency in her top 5. I had individualization in my top 10. And so I was very good at picking favorites, both in the family and in the workplace. And she helped make me see the dangers of that.
Hmm. Ah.
Um, and it it like I know that to be true, and my individualization is a superpower when I use it well, but I know it has a dark side. And having my wife have high consistency meant I was aware of my dark side more
Hmm.
in a much more fundamental way.
Does every strength have a dark side?
Pretty much, yeah, pretty much. Yeah, so you can, if you think of achiever, which is a classic Western value, achiever shows up in almost every strengths profiling tool you can think of. Sometimes they use a different language, but it always shows up in some way. And it's about work ethic and nose to the grindstone and yeah. But it is the source of burnout in society. It
Hmm.
is totally the source of burnout. Like I have coached more executives with high achiever who have wrecked their marriage or wrecked their family or wrecked their health because their achiever is pointed entirely at work, not at their hobbies, not at their fitness, not at their external relationships. They've just burned themselves completely.
Hmm. So before we move on from this, so right now I'm like I got to take this test and find and get some coaching because there's a lot of stuff that I think I could benefit from. For folks who are thinking the same thing, what's their next step?
So on my website, in the resources, there is a list of diagnostic tools, and it is all the diagnostic tools that I have used over the last 25 to 30 years. And Clifton Strengths is one of those tools. So you'll get a direct link into Gallup to take your assessment if that's what you want to do. My second book also has a chapter that lists 7 different strengths tools, and you can read that chapter and then choose the one choose the one that feels emotionally like the right one for you, because not every tool fits every person.
Uh, okay. And what's your website?
Christopher-miller.com.
Okay. So that will go in the show notes. Christopher hyphen little
Yeah,
line Miller.com.
yeah. /
Great.
resources if you want to see where the diagnostics are.
/resources. There it is. Okay, and you can also get to it for people who forget you can also find it from the top menu. Great. All right. Um, so you've been doing strength stuff for a long time, and at the same time as, like I read your professional bio on your website. It's very impressive. A lot of work in pharma and organizations and Gallup. You also have a personal story that sort of has a lot more storminess and than sort of a classic business bio. What of that would you like to talk about?
So I'm happy to talk about any of it. So why don't I do a quick bio, like kind of a
Sure.
quick plotted history, and then you can circle back and question me and ask questions about whatever feels most relevant for your listeners. So I grew up in Canada, and I did a couple of different degrees. I did a life sciences degree, thinking I was going to be a doctor or a physiotherapist, and then I discovered the business of healthcare partway through my undergraduate, and I ended up doing an MBA in health services management, which gave me the opportunity to understand hospital management, pharmaceuticals. Yeah, it was geared for the business of healthcare. And when I graduated in Canada, my parents were living in London at the time on a military posting, so I used that opportunity to backpack through Europe, and I ended up back in London, and I started a career in pharmaceuticals, and I had a really rich, rewarding career in pharmaceuticals for about 12 years, mostly in product management and marketing management, both traditional pharmaceuticals and biotech. And then at the end of my experience with pharmaceutical management, I was put on a coaching course to enhance my management skill. And little did they know, I would fall in love with the spirit of coaching and realize that's my next career. So when my wife and I moved, when we immigrated from Scotland to New Zealand, I reinvented myself and I joined a business development coaching company, and I coached small to medium sized businesses for 3 years in Wellington, mostly on a weekly rhythm, doing kind of entrepreneurial mindset and strategic planning, and loved it, really loved it. However, during that time, I went on a personal development. I love investing in personal development for myself. And I went to an extraordinary personal development event that literally blew my mind. So I lost touch with reality during that event, and I ended up in a mental health ward, and subsequently got diagnosed as bipolar in April of 2009. A year later, I joined Gallup and had so what was great from my point of view is I found the right medications very early, and I was stable on those medications, and I've been on the same medications for the last ever since April 2009, and it's allowed me to live a normal life with an awareness that I am managing bipolar, and that has its advantages as well as its disadvantages. So I then got a job with Gallup, and I worked for them as senior consultant for 7 years. and managed projects, culture change projects using employee engagement tools and Clifton Strengths. And again, loved it, but I missed the cut and thrust of small business. So in September 2017, I set up my own coaching and mentoring practice, which was fantastic and was going very well for the first couple of years. And then in June of 2020, unfortunately, my wife got diagnosed with a glioblastoma, which is brain cancer. And she went through 2 brain surgeries, radiation therapy. We got a clear brain scan halfway through that experience, and we celebrated by buying a dog. But unfortunately, the tumors came back, and
Mm.
in July of 2021, Fiona passed away. The Looking back, one of the extraordinary things about that process was that I somehow found the energy and the creativity to write a book. And I wrote the first half of the book in the 6 months before she passed away, mostly when she was recuperating and sleeping and regenerating herself as best she could. And then I wrote the last 5 chapters 3 months after she died. And
Mm.
the book took on a completely different focus. And so the end of the book is all about love and grief and resilience and gratitude, whereas the first 8 chapters of the book were all of my coaching philosophy on how to live a great life. And it was very hard to live a great life when you're losing your wife.
Mm.
It was it created a pretty unique book. And my first book was called the Joy of Finding Fish, fulfillment, a journey of fulfillment, inspiration, success, and happiness.
Mm. So, wow. So the first question that pops into my mind is like knowing, having written many books and knowing sort of the arc of like by the end of the book, you read back to the beginning of the book and you realize you didn't know what you were talking about, or you didn't have a context, or this sentence was actually the most important sentence in the book. Going through that process of nurturing and grief and loss, was there a way that that you look back at this is my coaching practice that changed how you looked at those earlier subjects?
What I've realized looking back is that fish philosophy was embedded in my coaching style from the very beginning. But the actual structure of fulfillment, inspiration, success, and happiness, especially in the months following losing Fiona, I used my fish score. I used to score myself, I still do, score myself out of 10 on fulfillment, inspiration, success, and happiness. And I was literally using that to see whether my life was getting any better or not. I was afraid that my life was only ever going to get worse because the trauma of losing Fiona was so severe. And so I used the fish score to monitor whether my day, my week, my month, my year was getting better or worse. And what I've realized in retrospect is that the core principles in the beginning of the book, which are about purpose and values and greatest imaginable challenge and life roles, they all kept me alive. All of it kept me alive. And so the book was therapeutic in one respect, but it was actually a life raft. It
Mm.
helped me survive.
Mm. And I can see, thinking back to what you're talking about strengths and balances, I could see that, it's hard to be happy when you're going through a trauma like that and losing the person that you love most in the world. And it's possible to think about, well, I'll better double down on success to kind of make up for it, right? That if each of these is, contributing to a total score, that if I can't have happiness, I'm going to double down on the others, as opposed to figure out how to rebuild happiness. How did
Well,
you deal with that?
and I'll use a personal example to show you how I survived. On the day that Fiona died, I thought my fish score would be 0, 0, 0, 0. And I didn't score myself on the day, like I wasn't that calculating, but I realized it after the fact that my happiness was 0, my success was zero, my inspiration was zero, but my fulfillment is based on my purpose statement, which at the time was to be a great dad, a loving husband, and an extraordinary coach. That was my purpose statement. That's how I felt fulfillment.
Mm.
And being a great dad and a loving husband on the day that she died, my fulfillment was actually quite high because I had to be there for my boys. I couldn't live. I I didn't fall apart to the point where I wasn't there for them. And
Mm.
so I was very much living my purpose that day and honoring her when she passed away. Um, and so knowing that a zero's like my 5 days in a mental health ward were 0, 0, 0, 0 days because I had no connection to reality. Like
Mm.
there was nothing to engage in fulfillment, inspiration, success, or happiness, right? But true 0, 0, 0, 0 days are really rare for everyone, really rare. And 10, 10, 10, 10 days are equally rare, and they are your best days on this planet. And I wrote at the end of the book, The Joy of Finding Fish, I wrote my 10 favorite days with Fiona, which were my 10, 10, 10, 10 days.
Mm. So you said you went to this personal development event and it triggered bipolar. Is that to say that you sort of had it and it had been latent, or?
Yeah. So in retrospect, I had enough growing up, and I've always been a high achiever. But there were moments of stress, and there were moments of coping badly with life that gave me enough hints to know that when the diagnosis was made in April, my wife remembers it happening in April 2009. I remember it happening in July of 2009 when I got back to New Zealand, because the personal development event happened in Australia. And it doesn't matter when I was diagnosed, but piecing the puzzle together, I had enough life experiences that were challenging in the 20 years before diagnosis to know that the bipolar diagnosis was accurate.
Mhm.
But I was a high
Okay.
performing, coping very well. The symptoms of bipolar were very transient, whereas after the mind blow up at the personal development event, um, it was more serious. Like I was definitely in a different mental state after the event.
Mm. So yeah, so when I think of bipolar, I think of extremes of affect and behavior, but not necessarily dissociation from reality. So was this different than bipolar, that moment?
Well, the trigger, like the personal development event was very intense. It was 5 days. It was in a room with 10,000 people. Like the octane was off the charts. And there were moments, there were processes we went through. So I went through but in retrospect, what I realized I went through was chakra alignment, chakra activation. I think I went through a Kundalini awakening. I was definitely connected to source. I had a oneness experience that was prolonged. Um, and in a way, I wouldn't go back and change it because it's made me who I am now. Like those insights
Mm.
are profound, like really deeply profound about humanity, about my own soul, my own well-being. Like I know stuff now that I never would have had I not had that break with reality. But the consequences at the time, my wife and sons were traveling with me in Australia. My sons were 5 years and 6 months old, and my wife was dealing with someone who's losing his mind at a high octane event. It was not pretty. It was not pretty at
Mhm.
all, and it was selfish of me to have put her through that. What I have tried to do, and the blessing is I haven't been in hospital since. I'm very stable. I'm very high performing. I held down a six-figure salary in a global management consulting firm for 7 years. Like there's nothing wrong. There's nothing like my self management, my self awareness and self management is very very high. And I am growing my practice and growing my reputation on the back of some of the awareness I found during those experiences.
So when I think about, mental health and talking about it at work, in the US, there's HIPAA protections for privacy, and there's a strong feeling like you don't want to share certain things with employers, with colleagues, certainly with clients. You're obviously very open.
Mhm.
Were you concerned about a stigma? Like
So
people would look at you as like a werewolf, like who, when is the moon gonna come out? And
yeah, I had very I had very compassionate conversations, particularly when I moved from the business development coaching environment to Gallup. I was very upfront with them, with my managers. I was very upfront from the very beginning. Like before that, when they gave me the job offer, I said, "There's something you need to know. This is what it is." And they were like, "You have the profile we're looking for. You have the experience we're looking for. We're going to take a shot. We're going to take a chance." And I was always deeply grateful for that. All of my managers at Gallup were very understanding, very compassionate. And every time my manager changed, I let them know about my condition. The people closest to me at work also knew, but I had the luxury of being in a very small team, and I had a very trusting relationship with my colleagues.
mm,
There were only a couple of incidents in 7 years where my mental health had an impact on delivery. And one was an anxiety situation where I was really frightened about delivering to an executive team. And my manager at the time got on the phone, talked me through it, calmed me down, and I delivered just fine. It was just fine.
mm,
And then there was another example in the 7 years where I missed an appointment because of my mental health that morning. And it was and it was I missed an appointment, and it was unprofessional in the way I missed the appointment. And
mm,
I knew that I was not in a good place at the time. But what was lovely was people were very understanding and very supportive, and they saw the best version of me. So Christopher Christopher in front of an executive team delivering well delivers really well, and they knew that to be true.
mm,
So that was it was a process. I felt very supported in my employment with Gallup in particular, and I'm really grateful to them. Um, when I when my wife and I decided that I would have the courage to set up my own coaching and mentoring practice, we built a financial safety net just in case it didn't go well. And
mm,
luckily it did go well, and we didn't need to use that safety net. But my self awareness and my self management has navigated the challenges of being good at my job. Most of my clients, because I put it in the first chapter of my book, all of my clients know that I'm bipolar. Like I
mm,
don't talk about it a lot, but they all know, right? And as long as I'm showing up for them the way they need me to show up, it's all good. And when I need to not be at a session, they understand, and they're very compassionate in return. And actually in my newest book, I wrote a chapter about energy management where I describe my process of knowing what I can deliver when I'm at 100%, what I know I can and can't deliver at 50% or lower. So, for example, I know I can parent very well when I'm down at 20% because my core purpose of being a great dad is that important that I can block out the mental health distractions and be a great dad. I can coach pretty well down at 50%. And when I'm at 50%, my clients don't notice that I'm at 50%.
mm,
When I'm at 100%, I can public speak, I can write books, I can do all sorts of great things. When I'm at 110%, it's kind of like being in the matrix. I see patterns in counter conversation, things are connected. It's a different level of awareness. When I'm too high, if I'm above 125%, it gets dangerous. It gets that's where I know I hardly ever hit that level of consciousness.
mm. So you're constantly sort of monitoring that number?
Yeah, I've gotten pretty good. I know I'm consistently between 85 and 105%. Like that's my sweet spot, and I can function really well in that range.
Hmm.
But when you have a mental health condition, whether it's anxiety or bipolar or depression, self awareness plays a big role in understanding what you can and cannot do. How do you add value to your colleagues? How do you add value to your clients when you are not at 100%? And one of the things I write about in book one is the fact that I believe the creative potential of people with mental health conditions is off the charts. So if you Google famous people with bipolar, you get an extraordinary list of business people, artists, authors, actors, just phenomenal individuals who have changed the planet in some way, partly because they are bipolar.
Mm. Give us three or four just
So
for grounding.
one of my role models is Ted Turner. He was the founder of CNN. He's
Hmm.
bipolar, and his energy for creation, like creating corporations, is phenomenal. But he also does a whole bunch in the environmental sector, like ranches with buffalo in North America. Mel Gibson is also bipolar, and some of his films reflect the connection to spirituality that people with bipolar go through. So, The Passion of Christ, and some of and even Braveheart. So yeah, he has definitely. I find it interesting that some really talented people um, have had, and depression is rife through the art world and literature. There are many authors and artists, like big artists, who have had depression.
Hmm. Yeah, my wife and I just got back from Arles, where Vincent van Gogh was in a mental institution several times, and
Yeah, yeah, and
um,
there's something about the fact that mental health or a journey of unstable mental health disconnects you from normal reality, but it creates an imagination and an inspiration that people who don't have mental health conditions can't appreciate.
yeah, well, I mean, when you were talking about, oneness consciousness and Kundalini consciousness and chakra alignment, like I have a vague sense from various things of what that might mean. I don't have an experiential knowing, like, oh yes, um, but it seems like that's might be actually another form of reality, as it's just not the one that you can like, deliver workshops and write checks and buy groceries in. But it's, people who've had long spiritual pedigrees tell me like we're all one, like there's one consciousness, we're all connected. And I'm like, okay, like that sounds true. Like
Yeah,
it's not, it's as opposed to a sort of a break with reality. It's sort of a break with a bandwidth of reality.
yeah, and I would say that the it so and there's a lot about oneness and chakra activation and kundalini awakening that is Eastern in origin. um, the the way the world is going to now solve problems and change global consciousness is to integrate an awareness of oneness with traditional Western thinking. So when you look at what AI is going to do to organizations around the world, it has an element of oneness to it, because at our fingertips is the wisdom of humanity at the end of a chatbot, right? Like you can use a chatbot to answer almost any question now. And that is
Yeah.
humanity's wisdom at your fingertips. That is oneness. So oneness is coming whether we like it or not. And integrating oneness with Western corporate traditional philosophy and Eastern philosophy and European. So I found it interesting that for the umpteenth year in a row, Scandinavia came out on top of the happiness index. Well, there's something about the way people live in Scandinavia that equates to wellness and thriving and feeling successful and feeling connected, and like humanity can learn from our best examples of ourselves. We just need to pay attention, right? The problem right now is we're all so insular that we're not paying attention to all the signals that the universe is giving us.
Hmm. So when you talk about oneness, what I'm thinking about, I'm looking at my notes again, and that your big word that we talked about is love, and the two words that I have in quotes are practical epiphanies. Is there a relationship between what you talk about oneness, about the potential of AI, about looking at the bright spots in humanity, and your focus on love?
Yes, and there's a deeper story to it. Um, for 16 months after I lost Fiona, I was disconnected from my purpose. I had no purpose. There was no theme to my life other than survival. There was no sense, like I was living looking after my boys, so that was my sense of purpose, was making sure they were okay. But when I re-entered the working world in a significant way about 16 months after I lost Fiona, one of the strategies, and from the personal development organization that I belong to called Thought Leaders, they have a philosophy where you choose a word for a certain amount of time that represents who you are. And when I re-entered the work world, I realized that my word at the time was courage. And I lived courage for a good 18 months, from that moment of paralysis to knowing that I could survive, and I was leaning into courage. And there was a moment when I went to a conference, and I realized that what's emerging for me is transitioning from fish, fulfillment, inspiration, success, and happiness. Fish is how we live our lives, but why we live our lives is love. We live for love, mostly. And so I knew coming out of that conference that love was in my future. And a number of things happened. I started to experiment with love in my coaching relationships, and I've now got a whole portfolio of products coming out that are linked to coaching love. But on March 6th, which was a Wednesday, at 2:30 in the morning, I woke up and stared at my clock, and I realized in that moment that my big word had changed from courage to love. And that was my epiphany. And it gave me permission to go public with a whole bunch of love intellectual property that I had previously kept private.
So I think a lot of us who are, think of ourselves as thought leaders, we have two sides, right? We have the side we really care about, and then the commercial side, how we wrap ourselves and the masks we put on. And so I'm in your shoes thinking about, okay, I'm doing fulfillment, inspiration, success, happiness. All of those are sort of corporate friendly to one degree or another, or business friendly, or I'm willing to pay for that. What happened when you said, sort of opened your kimono and said, "This is about love, baby"? Like,
Yeah.
did people like, well, great, but how does that affect our bottom line? Or were they like, parched earth, please give us the rain?
It was interesting. Like I found it really interesting that I'm a 17-year experienced coach. And it took me until February of this year to have the courage to coach love objectively for my clients. And yet love is so important to us in life, right? Love is like critical to all of our survival. And so three of the questions that I'm now using consistently in any situation, family coaching, business coaching, personal coaching, executive coaching, I'm using one of these three questions, if not all three of them, consistently, which is what would love do? What would love say? And how would love feel? And one of the situations that I used those questions was a performance management relationship between a leader of leaders and one of her staff who she was struggling to figure out what to do next with. And I sat in the coaching room and said, what would love do? What would love say? How would love feel? And she left knowing exactly what she should do. So I'm able, like, I didn't think, like you, there was a piece of me going, I can't talk love with my clients. I can't, like, how's that going to come across? Like, it's just crazy. I'm a 52-year-old widower using love in a coaching situation. And yet it's the most natural thing that I can do. And it actually has deep, deep insights for my client.
Mm. Yeah. Do you find you're attracting different clients now, or the same ones who you can reach at a different level, or?
Bit of both, bit of both. My my existing relationships are richer and deeper and more meaningful, and there are people intrigued by my positioning. And I'm doing some. I'm like, I've got, on July 1st, I'm launching a deck of cards called Let's Talk Love. It's a very simple choose your own adventure game, but I've used it, I've tested it with female professionals, male professionals, couples, non-couples, kids. I've done it with my 15-year-old son. It's a game that allows you to have a conversation about love in a fun and easy way, in ways that I suspect lots of people in society are not doing. And so
Yeah.
I can build a whole coaching future just on the Let's Talk Love cards.
Do you find a difference in how men and women relate to this approach?
Yes, women get it and understand it and are leaning into it. Men are like, "What are you doing, Christopher?" Um, and it's been really fascinating with the couples that I've tested Let's Talk Love with. Uh, the gratitude from both partners when they actually lean into the game is significant, because
Hmm.
men think they can't talk about this stuff, but if you give them a safe framework and you give them space to actually have a conversation about love with the person they care about most, profound change happens for the couple. And the women in that relationship normally are like, thank God something changed.
Hmm. There's a lot more I want to talk to you about, but we're at the hour, and so I want to respect both of our times and our commitment. But people are listening to this and they're going, "I want more." You've you've triggered all sorts of curiosities and thoughts in me, and some people are like, "I really want to work with Christopher, and I want to find out what he knows." And how do people do that?
So best place to get me would be at christopher-miller.com. There's a contact page. You can fill in your details and reach out to me anytime. Um, I also, for 2024, on the last Friday of the month at 10 a.m. New Zealand Standard Time, I host a strength-based, heart-centered leadership workshop. It's free. It's over Zoom, and it goes a little bit further than what you and I have had time to talk about. It goes deeper into a strength-based approach. It goes deeper into a heart-centered approach. It integrates the two. But that's an experience people can have for free, to see if they get along with me, and then if that leads to something. Normally, my clients start on either a 6-month unlimited coaching contract or a 12-month unlimited coaching contract, depending on how courageous people are.
Gotcha, gotcha. And so just for people in the US who can't picture the globe, 10 a.m. New Zealand time, I think is
Thursday evening.
uh, Thursday, like 11 p.m.
Well, no, 10 a.m. in New
Eastern.
Zealand. 10 a.m. in New Zealand on a Friday is like 4 p.m. to 7 p.m. in North America.
Really? Okay. Well, I guess I'm one of those Americans who can't picture the globe. Cool. Well, people can go to the time converter and find out what it is, but it sounds and are there recordings available?
There are on request, so they're not logged on my website, but on request I can release a recording easily.
Okay, so people sign up and then they're like, "Oh, I can't make it." They can still find out more
Yeah,
about
so
what
if
you're
you
about.
register for an event, you automatically get the recording for that event. I don't publish the historical events.
Sure. Okay, gotcha. So Christopher-Miller.com and everything's there. and you're coming out with a card deck and your second book. So say the names of the two books again. Can people get them like anywhere or just from your website?
No, online platforms like Amazon are all carrying both books already. So you can get them
Okay.
as of now. If you want a signed copy of my book, you can buy them off my site in New Zealand. But the two books, the first book I wrote was called The Joy of Finding Fish, a journey of fulfillment, inspiration, success, and happiness. And the second book I wrote is called Finding Fish in a Strength Based Practice, Fulfillment, Inspiration, Success, and Happiness in a Life Well Lived. And surprise, surprise, book three is underway, which is How to Find Fish Through Expansive Love.
Mm, I love it. I love the trajectory and the way you've really kind of synthesizing these two, the coaching strength-based approach, which has 50 years of pedigree and development, and also this sort of Esalen, Leo Biscaglio, softer thing that has grown up alongside it and figured out ways to integrate it in your own life and to share it with the world that really needs it. So thank you so much for the work you do. Anything you'd want to add before we say goodbye for now?
I think I would ask everyone listening to follow their heart as much as their head. The world has turned out the way it is at the moment because we've focused on problem solving using our heads. And I genuinely believe that an integrated approach using head, heart, and gut has far better likelihood of success and allowing humanity to thrive.
Amen. Amen. So it's 9 a.m. here. My gut is telling me it wants oatmeal.
Good.
Um, my head is thinking about the rest of the day, and my heart is it's really grateful and open to you for sharing your story with such transparency and um, clarity and generosity.
My pleasure, Howie. My pleasure. Yeah, it's I have one of my personal values is live life out loud, and it doesn't sit well with some of my family members. They're much more private, but it for me because I've experienced oneness and I know there is only one of us. I need to say what I say to help as many people as I can.
Yeah. So, and again, I love, that courage kind of underpins love in some ways.
Yeah, I wouldn't, if I hadn't had courage as my word that preceded love, I never would have leaned into love. Like it was a big, big leap of faith to go, I'm going to build my reputation as a coach, as a mentor, as a thought leader on love. Fuck, I had no idea I was up for that.
Yeah, and so I kind of want to echo your exhortation to the viewers and listeners. Follow your heart as much as your head, and notice what comes up for you when you think about doing that.
Mm.
Right? What are the scenarios? What are the predictions that are likely to stop you in your tracks? And then that's a really good place for body awareness.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, because when I ask people where love sits in their body, it's not always the heart. It's not always, like, it's often the heart, but it's not always. And so if your love feeling sits in your gut or sits on your shoulder or sits in between your eyes, why is that? Like, notice that. What are you going to do with it? How does that change the way you think, the way you behave, what you're willing to commit to? And people have a tendency to trust their head more than their heart. And it's backwards. It's completely backwards.
Yeah, yeah. And I would encourage people to look at your body, like where are you tight? Where do you have pain? Where do you have limitation in movement? And sure, it could have been, a bike accident you had when you were 17, but it also could be sort of chronic patterns of resisting the call to love because
Yeah.
it's felt so damn scary or uh, um, an okay
Yeah.
to be that person. So I think we're calling for a global revolution in consciousness. So
Yeah,
you
so on July 1st, in addition to a book launch and a card deck launch, I'm launching a website called Expansive Love, and that's the beginning of my movement.
all right. Well, you lead the way, and me and a whole lot of people will be marching behind you. So thank you for your leadership.
That's all right. I'll do my best. Some other people might pick up the baton from time to time.
Well, we're all one, so it's all good. Thank you so much for all you do and for your generosity and sharing your time and your story today.
No, my pleasure. My pleasure. It's yeah, it's fun to just know that people want to hear some of what's going on, and yeah, it's hard to imagine that it's relevant, but it feels congruent for me, right? At my end, I'm like, this is what I'm meant to do. This is my purpose, and I'll just keep doing it and see if people notice.
Yeah, beautiful. Well, people, I hope will notice, and I hope they'll let us know, and they'll reach out to you, and they'll leave comments for me, and so this, when we drop the stone, we can hear the plink in the well,
Nice,
and that helps us keep going. So, Christopher, thank you so much, and I'll talk to you again soon.
great. Thanks, Howie.
And that's a wrap. Show notes for today's episode at plantyourself.com/593. Movement news, big day today. I got a new personal record for push-ups, 27 on my first set. And I don't know if it's because I've been doing these other exercises, sort of lat exercises and interior stuff and deltoids, and I don't know. Doing a lot more arm stuff, that may have helped. I've also been supplementing with a teeny little teaspoon of creatine in the morning in a glass of water. I wrote an article, Ghost wrote an article for Food Revolution Network about creatine, and I was kind of impressed by what I saw about its ability to help with muscle gain if you're also eating a healthy diet and working out. So I'm giving it a try. Doesn't seem like there's much downside. I'll let you know. Other than that, Ultimate, we didn't have a very big practice on Sunday, so I have more energy today. Maybe that's where I got the 27 push-ups from. There was only 7 people, and it was pretty gentle. We just ran around hard for about an hour, and it's really, really hot here. It's in the high 90s. It's probably going to reach 90 in my office. I got the little ceiling fan on, but I don't know how long I'll be able to keep sweating in here. But looking forward to fall and to not needing to hydrate quite so much every time I go for a walk or a jog or a workout or a match or a game. So that's about it for me. As always, be well, my friends.